Okay, you're thinking about coming back to New World, or you have just come back to New World and you're wondering what to do? Well, this is my returning player guide for you. Now, there's quite a wide variety of different players might be coming back. There'll be some people who aren't level 60 yet, some people who are level 60 but not expertise 600, and some people who are gear score 600 trying to get to 625. I'm going to cover those three things, and I'm going to put timestamps for the video so that you can click either of those. Before we start though, I just want to give a big shout out to my YouTube members. Thank you very much to you guys. If you want to support the channel, that's the best way to do so. Okay, so let's jump in. If you're not level 60 yet, you have two main options. One of them is to just level up to level 60, and the other is to play on the fresh servers that are coming out on the 2nd of November. I personally recommend that anybody who's probably around level 30, 40 or lower, I think it's probably wise that you go on the fresh servers. Yes, you might want to play now, but I just think you'll have a better experience overall if you do wait and you go on fresh. That fresh MMO feeling, it's very satisfying. If, however, you are somewhere in between that range and you want to actually just get to level 60 now, then there's two things that are super important. Sort of how you level before Brimstone and how you level after. Brimstone Sands is coming out on the 18th and it's going to change a few different things. First and foremost, right now up until the 18th, there is a 1.5 times experience rate, and then when actually the Brimstone Sands update comes, the leveling curve is being changed and being made about half as easy. So in my mind, it's not really important whether or not you level now or after Brimstone, just level when you want to. However, how you level is important. If you are leveling before the 18th and before Brimstone Sands, I recommend doing town board quests and your main story. So the town board is the one that's in every town. It's near sort of like the office. You go and check what missions are available, and generally you're going to want to hand in the crafted items because they just give you your best bang for your buck. Do town boards and do your main quest. Now, when Brimstone Sands comes out, this changes. Town boards are pretty much useless for leveling in the new update. The XP that you get is dramatically nerfed. There's some reasons to do them, but that falls outside of this video right now. All I'm saying is when Brimstone Sands turns up, you simply just want to do quests, do your main story quest and do your side quests, and you'll level up relatively quickly. So that's it for people who aren't level 60. You have those two options. Play fresh or level doing the method I just outlined. If though you are level 60 but you don't have expertise 600, well, this is a part of the video for you. And in this section, we need to talk about expertise and gypsum. Sure, your expertise is very important, but in the Brimstone Sands patch, its importance is slightly diminishing, and I'll explain. So when the Brimstone patch comes on the 18th of October, in PvP Arena and Outpost Rush, your gear is going to get scaled to gear score 600. That means any gear that you buy or acquire will get scaled up to 600. And you'll maybe not be super competitive, but it's less likely you're just going to get absolutely smashed in those competitive modes. Keep in mind that your expertise is still relevant in open world PvP, wars, and pretty much all PvE expeditions and stuff like that. But what is good about this change is that it does mean that you can buy or acquire gear that's sort of like semi-decent, even if your expertise isn't 600, and you can still be slightly competitive in Outpost Rush and PvP Arena. As long as you have the right attributes and generally resilient, you'll be okay in PvP. Not amazing, but okay. And one thing I would maybe recommend if you're in this sort of like middle ground right now, and maybe you don't have lots of gold, well, make sure you're doing your 3 faction quests a day, basically, because you'll get extra tokens and you'll get extra gold. And then if you buy the 520 gear from your faction store, it has resilient on it, and you know what, you won't be absolutely god awful when the patch comes around if you're doing Outpost Rush. It's sort of like a cheap, easy way to get into PvP. And then after that, if you've got the gold, you can probably buy Voidbent. Or, to be fair, at this point, you don't really need to buy Voidbent. You can probably buy a decent 2-perker, where it's like your weapon perk and resilient, and if you're doing PvP, you'll be happy with that. As I said, that's just PvP. Outside of PvP, and including wars, you will need your expertise up, because otherwise what happens with your expertise and your gear, it gets sort of scaled halfway between the two. So let's say that you're fresh level 60, your expertise is 500, but you equip some gear score 600 stuff that you bought off the trading post. Well, actually that gear then gets scaled to 550. Its effectiveness is diminished. If you actually acquire the gear yourself in the new patch, then you are actually able to use the gear score that it is of the item. So if you find a drop that's 590, it will be 590 for you no matter what. But as we said, it is still going to be worth to get your expertise up, because your expertise is going to, in general, determine the level of your drops. It's not as obvious as that, it's not as easy as that anymore, but in general, you're going to want to get your expertise up to avoid scaling and get better drops. Now, thankfully, you can get your expertise up in quite a few different ways. This used to be called the high watermark gear score for any of you OGs who are coming back, and you may have got fed up with chest runs, because chest runs are now no longer the absolute best way of getting your expertise up. You can still do chest runs and they are still useful, but don't worry, you don't just have to do those to be efficient. Really, the best way to get your expertise up is gypsum. Now, there are different types of gypsum that you get doing different activities. However, they all get turned into these gypsum orbs, which you then make a specific slot cast. So let's say I do Outpost Rush, I get 1 gypsum no matter what, win or lose. I can then turn that into 1 orb, and then with that orb, I could maybe make like a leg cast. And if my expertise was 500, that cast, I would open it, it would give me some legs, and it would also actually give me some expertise bump, probably between 2 and 10, I think is the actual amount these days. And the lower level your expertise, the higher the bumps are. The closer you get to 600, the bumps sort of go down a little bit. Now, as I said, you can actually get gypsum now from all different types of activities, which really spreads the end game out. In a moment, we'll list them and have a look at them, but just know that they are generally capped per day at how many you can create. And it's actually a bit weird to explain because certain different types of gypsum, there's one type of gypsum where maybe you need 5 of it to create 1 orb, but there's another type of gypsum where you only need 1. It gets a little bit confusing in that sense. I will leave a link to a spreadsheet that Danny made. It sort of very concisely shows you how many you get and how many you need to make the orb. But just know that basically they're generally capped per day. So I think, for example, Outpost Rush is capped at 2 per day, but then you can make 2 orbs from it. That's a little bit awkward to explain. I'm not sure I did a good job there, but let's just run through the different types of gypsum. You get ruby gypsum that comes from Outpost Rush. You get obsidian gypsum that you get from defeating level 60 plus elite mob bosses in the open world, generally in your elite areas. Topaz gypsum you get from killing level 60s, but you need to have taken a potion that enables that topaz to drop. Sapphire gypsum comes from expeditions once you defeated the last boss. Emerald gypsum comes from your aptitude chests. So if you are a gatherer or crafter or something like that, you can get it from doing that. Citrine gypsum comes from your PvE arenas. Garnet gypsum comes from your PvP arenas. Amethyst gypsum comes from your breaches, so like your corrupted breaches if you go and close them down. And diamond gypsum, this one is sort of subject to change. At the minute, it comes from these hidden stashes. If you go out gathering, you'll get 3 relatively quickly, but they also do change. Like for the example, the winter festival, it became so you had to go to the Christmas trees in town to get it. It's sort of like the seasonal one, if you will. And when it comes to gypsum orbs, you can also buy 2 from your faction vendor every day. So doing those faction missions actually really useful no matter what. And to be fair, you can also get gypsum orbs from quests. I think now in Brimstone, almost every quest will give you one basically. Well, not every quest, but a lot of quests will. And I think it's Ebonscale and Reekwater where you also get gypsum. I might be wrong on that one, but there are some quests that give it you. And you'll see those as quest rewards before you even start the quest, so you'll know. Now, there are other ways of getting bumps up in your expertise, as I mentioned, beyond just gypsum. For example, the chest from Outpost Rush that you get at the end, they give you bumps. Corrupted Breach caches, I think they can give you bumps in expertise. Same for Wars of Invasion caches. You also get bumps from just finding gear in the open world. If, for example, you kill a level 60 mob, it can, in theory, give you an expertise bump. Generally, for me, the best ways to get your expertise up at this point is probably to do the expeditions. You can do chest runs fine, but I think expeditions are probably more enjoyable for a lot more people. I know that expeditions are free to enter. They are time gated in the sense that you can only do like 25 a day. But I mean, I'll be surprised if you're going to run into that limit. But if you're a fresh level 60 and you're working on your expertise, doing Genesis and Lazarus are probably the places where you're going to have to start. The normal versions, I mean here. Once you get up to gear score 570, then you might be able to try Tempest Heart. And then finally, as you're approaching gear score 600, you might want to jump into Barnacles and Black Powder. Doing the expeditions right now has been made a lot easier because of the group finder. So there's no entry fee, it's just capped at like 25 a day, and the group finder will help you actually get into them. That works for normal expeditions, and it's going to work for the mutations later on. So for me, that's how you would get to expertise 600. There's probably more nuances than that, but they're the main ways. You do your gypsums, and then you want to do some kind of content that is also going to give you expertise bumps. You can do that in Outpost Rush, you can do that with those corrupted breaches, but I think expeditions are really probably the main source and the main recommendation right now. Okay, so your expertise 600, now what? Well, there's 2 things really to consider. How you're going to get the gear and how you're going to get the Umbral Shards to get to gear score 625. So let's start with the Umbral Shards first, because it's actually relatively easy to explain. You have 2 main ways of getting Umbral Shards. One is the same gypsum that we were talking about before, because if you are at expertise 600 and you open a gypsum cast for that slot, you will get Umbral Shards. Now, the higher your expertise is in one slot, the more Umbral Shards you get, obviously capped at 625. So generally it's worth upgrading like a couple of slots before others. Now there's a little bit of a complicated formula behind that. Generally the order in which you want to upgrade your gear is weapons and then chest and then legs and then helm and then everything else. And I think getting a decent set of weapons is actually very important early on. The other way of getting Umbral Shards is to do the expedition mutations. Now the thing here is that you need to have gear score 600 before I would even recommend stepping in an M1, and then the higher up your gear score, the more higher level at mutation you can do. But that's all useless if you don't have good gear in the first place, so let's talk about where you're going to get your gear from. The first option is to simply buy it. If you have enough gold, it's probably worth buying it. If you're into PvP, then you can just buy Resilient and either a weapon perk or a good perk, and you'll be sort of semi-decent. If you're interested in PvE, you can do the same. However, there are ways of getting gear without buying the gear. One of them for PvP is the PvP reward track. This is an XP system where the more you do PvP, the more XP you get, the more salt you get, which is currency to allow you to buy items from the reward track. They will often be semi-decent. They'll often have the right attribute, they'll have Resilient on them, and it's basically free. So keep an eye on the reward track to get semi-decent PvP gear. And for PvE, well then you just sort of want to be doing mutations and expeditions. Obviously you might have to just do the normal expeditions first, but you know what, for PvE you'll generally get good gear doing that anyway. And then the more mutations you do, the better gear you'll get. It's worth noting that in the Brimstone Sands update, there's actually some gear that drops as legendary. For example, there's a quest that will give you a greatsword. I think it like gear score 605 or 610, something like that. And weirdly, even if you're not expertise 600, that might be worth going getting. So that's it really. Getting from gear score 600 to 625 is sort of very similar to the path before it, except you now have mutations to do and they'll give you the best Umbral Shards basically, especially in the Brimstone patch. Now that's all I really want to talk about when it comes to a returning player guide. I could probably make this video like 3 hours long if we spoke about every little thing that had changed, but let's not do that. I have made a video that outlines the major things that have changed. I'll leave a link to that in the description or wherever it is at the end of the video. Let me know your thoughts though. I tried to keep this to actually what I think returning players would need to know. Obviously, if you've been playing the game on and off, this video probably not that helpful for you, and I do apologize about that. Again though, big shout out to my YouTube members. I do really appreciate you guys. Have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.